Here's a tutorial on Finale by Dvorak. This is on page 94 of the Adult Piano Adventures Book 2. Pretty epic piece here. Let's figure out what key we're dealing with. So the way that we tell what key we're in, there are a couple of ways. First way is we look at the opening. So we have our usual treble, bass, key signature, all that good stuff. There's no sharps or flats, so that's a good indicator. It could be A minor, it could be C major, because 0 sharps or flats are within those two keys, and they are related keys. Another kind of sure way to double check your answer, whether or not it's C major or A minor, is if we look at the very end of the piece. So on this last measure, we are outlining A, C, E, A. So there's a lot of A, C, E, A minor notes. So this is in the key of A minor. And you will definitely hear it when you play through. Okay, so a couple things to tackle within this piece is the concept of the triplet. Triplets are really fun to play. These are pretty standard triplets that we'll see a lot within this level of music. So we have if we look at the blue box at the top, here's kind of a layout of how a triplet works within our 4/4 time signature. So you're basically fitting 3 notes into one beat. So the triplet, and it's indicated with like a little 3 above. Sometimes, depending on the music, you'll see a little 3 with like brackets attached to the 3. But either case, it means a triplet. So you're gonna feel a triplet within that pulse. And the way that we count triplets is 1 and a, or depending on where that triplet is within the piece. So for example, in the finale, it's actually on beat 2. So if we look at measure 7 and at the end of the piece, measure 23, they both have the exact same notes in the exact same rhythm with the exact same triplet on beat 2. So that's gonna go 1, 2 and a 3, 4. But let's initially just try on, let's say, C, going through this melody that's in the blue box at the top of the page. So if our beat is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. So even on the quarter notes that are just straight quarter notes, no triplets, we still save 2 and a and 4 and a to make sure that everything is super even with the pulsing. Because we don't want to rush those quarter notes at the beat 2 and the beat 4 at the first measure of that exercise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's essentially the same timing, just I didn't say the and-as. But I highly recommend getting used to saying and for triplets, especially if this is a new concept for you. Okay, but let's first initially dive into the chords that we're going to be using within the finale. So we have in the left hand A minor, and these are all written blocked, so that's great. Measure 2, we have this chord, and we know from our chord progression in A minor, this is what we call a 1/4 chord, or D minor, DFA, within the chord progression, back to A minor. So we just kind of alternate between those two. And then when we get to measure 7, here's where that 5/7 or E7 comes in. Back to A. So if you want to keep your hand a little more centered in the keys, that's awesome. Good for getting to that 5/7, or just reminding yourself when you get closer to that measure 7, okay, I'm going to be a little further in for that G sharp on the 5/7. So this measure 1 to 8, if we were to analyze going through the sections of this piece, we have the A section, measure 1 to 8. Measure 9 to 16 is what we call the B section, very different from A. And then we have the A section come back at measure 17. The only difference, though, is if we compare measure 7 and 8 with 23, 24, this is what the difference will be. So that's the first 7 and 8. The last 2 bars sound like this. So that last left-hand part is a little bit different, but overall, everything else is the same, even pretty much down to the pedaling. So that's it for the left hand on the A section. Let's talk about the melody in the right hand. So this is that cool triplet coming up on measure 7. Even with that very short melody that I just played, we need to consider at measure 6, if we're starting this piece out with 3 on A at the opening, when you get to measure 6, 3 is actually on that A at the end of measure 6, and then there was a quick switch to A minor position on measure 7 to do this triplet going up to the E, 1 and a triplet, and then there's a big stretch down the octave, 3, 4. So try not to get into the habit of separating the octave E's. I feel like most adults can definitely reach an octave pretty well. So if you can lean in, feel that legato connection, E, E, that is great to add in. Putting it together, we have when you're putting it together, one thing that could happen is we're so focused on like really feeling those chords that we forget to lift off and consider the rests that are happening in the left hand. For example, measure 3 into 4. There shouldn't be no bass chord being played or heard in measure 3. It's straight silence in the left hand. So you want to let go. Off. And then come back in. And that's the same thing going from measure 7 into 8. Off. So if you need to circle the rest or do a little slash to show to come off with the hand, you're definitely welcome to add that into your music. And the same thing goes for measure 17 to the end. So if we're considering the both hands at the last 2 bars, that's a pretty big leap from A. And it doesn't say to slow down at all either. So you're keeping that consistent tempo all the way to the end. So even just practicing this, considering a slide as opposed to a jump, that actually works out a bit better for most people instead of lifting off the hand. Okay, let's go into the B section. So measure 9. This is a little bit newer material, and keeping in mind the first section was pretty strong with dynamics, and now we're getting into a softer, more mellow part of the piece. With the rhythm, so it's a pretty straightforward rhythm, but just considering the eighth notes at the end of that, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. Left hand also consider, we have kind of a double eighth note situation, back to back. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4. So kind of practice that on its own. When you put it together, what's really nice is that the first right hand slur for those 2 bars at measure 11 and 12, it actually matches really nicely with the left hand. But then you have to continue with that at the end of the measure there. Similarly, when you get to the second line on page 2, this is a little bit stronger, mezzo forte. Here's the together, same rhythm again, same notes. With a writ and a crescendo to a forte. So by the time you get to the end of measure 16, we should be accented and loud, right? So really dig into your notes. And keeping that left hand, sorry, I'll start a little softer. That's kind of like the dramatic part of the piece, that crescendo accent at measures 16, 15, 16. So definitely take a little bit of time for that writ, but it's nice to know that they share the same notes together. Okay, and then we continue on to measure 17, which is a repeat of the first section. So once you have the hang of these notes, rhythms, and all that good stuff, dynamics, then we have the pedaling to consider. So pedaling for this one, it's kind of relying a little bit on pedal per chord and pedaling based on how the melody is going. Because if we look at the first section, you could easily do a pedal per measure, per chord. but because this melody is pretty stepwise, like kind of hearing this blended doesn't sound super great. So we're gonna pedal according to the melody as well. So let's pedal down first. Pedal, 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 pedal. Pedal, 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 pedal. So when you're pedaling, doing your pedaling practice, I would, aside from just practicing left hand with pedal, I would also just practice right hand by itself with the pedal. Pedal, 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 pedal. So ultimately the steps are, do not practice it with pedal right when you're first learning it. So kind of strip away the pedal, and then when you're comfortable with either right hand, left hand, putting it together, you can consider pedaling separate hands, because we don't want to rely on the pedal to connect all of our notes. That's why we don't practice with it initially. We want to make sure that we're doing legato fingers. And then when you're pedaling, there's that knowing that your right hand is doing the legato by itself instead of relying on your pedal to do it all for you. So you're still feeling that connection, but then you're adding that coordination of the foot for the pedaling. And lastly, considering, okay, when I'm pedaling, note first, and then a foot up, down, right? Note first. So also getting used to that coordination, which will honestly take some time. Okay, I'm going to play through the piece all together with the pedal so you can hear what that sounds like.